I'm a mechanic who survived the first 12 hours of the alien invasion, and this is my story. Before I begin, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. It was 1:17 p.m. when it happened. I was underneath Mrs. Rodriguez's ancient Buick, fighting with a rusted-out exhaust pipe that refused to surrender without a struggle. The radio in the garage was playing classic rock, but I barely noticed it over the grinding of metal and my own cursing. Then the music cut out, replaced by the emergency broadcast tone that always made my skin crawl. Before the announcement could even begin, the ground beneath me started to vibrate. Not like an earthquake. I'd felt those before during my stint working in California. This was different, rhythmic, deliberate, like massive footsteps approaching. My name is Hector Alvarez, owner of Alvarez Auto Repair in the small town of Pine Ridge, just outside of Denver. 15 years fixing everything from luxury sports cars to decades-old farm trucks had taught me that most problems have a logical solution if you're patient enough to find it. But nothing in my career had prepared me for what crawled out of the sky that afternoon. I rolled out from under the Buick just as Marco, my youngest apprentice, burst through the door from the front office. "Hector, you gotta see this." His voice cracked with panic, his eyes wide behind smudged glasses. The vibrations were stronger now, making the tools on my workbench rattle and dance. I followed Marco outside, wiping grease from my hands with a rag that had probably just made them dirtier. The bright Colorado sun momentarily blinded me, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw what had Marco, and now half the town, staring open-mouthed at the sky. It wasn't just one object. It was dozens. Massive, angular shapes hovering silently above Pine Ridge, each one easily the size of a football field. They weren't the sleek flying saucers for movies. These were jagged, asymmetrical, like someone had taken pieces of different metal sculptures and welded them together with no regard for aesthetics. The surfaces seemed to ripple and shift, catching the sunlight in ways that hurt to look at directly. "What the hell are they?" Marco whispered beside me. I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. All my practical knowledge of machines and engines suddenly felt ludicrously insignificant. People were pouring out of buildings all along Main Street, phones raised to capture whatever was happening. Some were shouting, some praying, some trying to call loved ones. A few were already sprinting for their cars, the flight response kicking in hard. Officer Reynolds, our local cop, was trying to maintain some semblance of order, but his voice was drowned out by the cacophony of panic and the increasingly intense vibrations coming from above. The radio in my shop suddenly blared back to life, loud enough to hear from outside. "This is an emergency alert. Unknown aircraft have been reported over major cities across the United States. Citizens are advised to remain indoors and await further instructions. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not." The broadcast cut out again, replaced by a sound that drove straight into my skull, a high-pitched, modulating tone that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Around me, people clutched their heads, some dropping to their knees. And then silence, complete and unnatural. When I looked up again, something was descending from the largest of the hovering craft. Not a classic flying saucer or anything recognizable. It looked almost like liquid metal pouring downward, except it moved against gravity, forming tendrils and shapes that defied physics. The stream of whatever it was touched down in the center of Main Street, about 100 yards from my garage. The substance pooled and then rose, forming what I can only describe as roughly humanoid shapes. If humans were 9 feet tall, had too many joints, and were made of constantly shifting metal. Their heads had no recognizable features, just smooth, reflective surfaces that somehow gave the impression of watching, analyzing. "Marco," I said quietly, not taking my eyes off the figures, "go inside, grab the emergency kit from under the front desk, and bring my truck around back. Don't run." To his credit, the kid obeyed without question, backing up slowly before disappearing into the garage. 3 of the metallic figures began moving through the crowd. They didn't walk so much as flow, their lower portions rippling across the pavement. People scattered before them, but some, either frozen in fear or driven by curiosity, remained in place. An older man, Mr. Collins, who owned the hardware store, approached one of the entities with his hands raised in what I guess he thought was a universal gesture of peace. "We welcome you to Pine Ridge," he called out, his voice shaking but determined. "We mean you no harm." The entity paused, its surface rippling more intensely. A tendril extended from its midsection, reaching toward Collins faster than seemed possible. When it touched his chest, Collins went rigid, his eyes wide with shock. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. Collins' body seemed to fold inward, collapsing like an empty suit. The entity's form bulged and shifted, and then stretched into a perfect replica of Collins, down to the plaid shirt and khaki pants he'd been wearing. The crowd's shock turned to screaming chaos. People ran in all directions as the other entities began advancing more purposefully. I backed up toward my garage, my mind racing. Whatever these things were, they weren't here for friendly first contact. Marco appeared at the back door, his face pale. "Truck's ready," he choked out. "What's happening out there?" "Nothing good," I replied, ushering him inside. "Where's Ellie?" Ellie Chun was my front desk manager and the organizational backbone of the entire operation. Called her husband to pick up their kids from school. Said she'd meet us at your place if things got bad. Smart woman. I'd always known she was the brains of the operation. I grabbed the emergency bag for Marco, a kit I'd put together after a particularly nasty blizzard had stranded me in the shop for 3 days a few years back. Food, water, first aid supplies, flashlights, batteries, a hand crank radio. Basic survival gear that I'd maintained out of habit more than actual expectation of use. "We need to get out of town," I said, leading Marco through the garage toward the back door where my modified 1998 Ford F-250 waited. Not the prettiest vehicle, but I'd rebuilt the engine myself, reinforced the frame, and added a few custom touches that made it perfect for Colorado's unpredictable terrain. Those things are taking people, becoming them somehow. Marco's eyes widened behind his glasses. "Like body snatchers? Are you serious?" "I don't know what they are," I admitted, "but I know we don't want to be here to find out more." We were almost to the truck when the back door of the garage burst open. I spun around, reaching for the nearest heavy tool, a torque wrench that suddenly felt absurdly inadequate. Ellie stood in the doorway, breathing hard. "They're everywhere," she gasped. "Main Street, the school, the supermarket. They are taking people and then becoming them." Her normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, her dark hair escaping its usual tight bun. "Your family?" I asked. Her expression crumpled momentarily before she steeled herself. "David got the kids. They're heading for his brother's cabin in the mountains." She squared her shoulders. "I came back for you two idiots. Figured you'd need someone with actual survival skills." Despite everything, I felt a smile tug at my lips. Typical Ellie, practical to the core. "Your confidence in us is touching." "Save it," she said, moving past me to the truck. "We need to go. Now." As if to punctuate her words, a crash came from the front of the garage. Something was breaking through the reception area. "Get in," I ordered, tossing the emergency bag to Marco as he scrambled into the back seat of the extended cab. Ellie took the passenger seat while I slid behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, one small comfort in a world suddenly gone mad. I'd tuned this motor myself, balanced and calibrated every component until it purred like a mechanized cat. At least some things still made sense. I threw the truck into reverse just as the inner door from the reception area splintered open. One of the metallic figures flowed through the gap, already reshaping itself to navigate the space. "Go, go, go," Ellie shouted unnecessarily. The truck's tires squealed as I backed out onto the alley behind the garage. Through the windshield, I caught a glimpse of the entity pausing at the rear door, its featureless face seeming to watch us as we fled. The alley connected to Cedar Street, which ran parallel to Main. I turned away from the center of town, hoping to circle around and hit the highway that would take us into the mountains. If David was taking Ellie's kids to a cabin, that seemed like the best option for us too. Remote, defensible, away from major population centers. Cedar Street was chaos. Cars jamming the road, some crashed into each other, others abandoned in the middle of the street, people running with whatever they could carry. I saw the pastor from the local church guiding his congregation into the back of a school bus, a mother pulling two crying children along the sidewalk, a teenage boy on a bicycle weaving through the gridlock. "We'll never get through this," Marco said from the back seat. "Watch and learn, kid," I replied, swinging the wheel hard right into Mrs. Peterson's front yard. The truck bumped over her carefully maintained flower beds, sorry, Mrs. P., and through a gap between two houses, emerging onto Willow Lane, a smaller residential street that should connect to Route 16 eventually. Willow Lane was clearer, but not empty. As we turned onto it, I saw another of those metallic figures in the distance, this one already shaped like a human, a police uniform. Officer Reynolds. Or something wearing his form. "Duck down," I hissed, slowing the truck to a crawl and killing the lights despite the broad daylight. The entity that looked like Reynolds was moving from house to house, knocking on doors. When a young woman answered one, the false Reynolds reached out to touch her shoulder. I looked away before I could see what happened next, my stomach churning. We crept past, staying as far to the opposite side of the street as possible. None of us breathed until we were around the corner. "They're infiltrating," Ellie whispered, "replacing people and just continuing like nothing's happened." "But why?" Marco asked. "What do they want?" "Does it matter?" I countered, speeding up now that we were out of immediate sight. "Whatever they want, I don't think it's good for us." Route 16 was ahead, the two-lane highway that would take us into the mountains if we could reach it. But as we approached the intersection, my heart sank. A military roadblock had been established, with two Humvees and several soldiers checking vehicles before allowing them through. Under normal circumstances, this might have been reassuring. But after what we'd seen, the soldiers' presence filled me with dread. Were they actually human? Or had the entities already infiltrated the military? I pulled over about 100 yards from the checkpoint, stopping behind a closed gas station. "What now?" Ellie asked, her voice tight with tension. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel, thinking, we need to know if those are real soldiers or not. If they're human, they might have information, maybe even protection. If not, I let the implication hang. How do we tell the difference? Marco asked. That thing looked exactly like Officer Reynolds. Ellie was scanning the area, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Look at the woman talking to the soldiers," she said, pointing to a civilian at the checkpoint. "Notice anything?" I squinted, watching as a middle-aged woman in a floral dress spoke animatedly to one of the soldiers. Her gestures were stiff, almost mechanical, her head moving in too precise increments. "The movements," I murmured. "They look human, but they move wrong." "Exactly," Ellie nodded. "Too perfect, too calculated. Real humans are messy, eh?" As we watched, the woman reached out to touch the soldier's arm. He recoiled instinctively, raising his rifle. A shout went up from the other soldiers, and suddenly everything was motion and chaos. The woman's form seemed to ripple, losing cohesion for a split second before lunging forward with impossible speed. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks echoing across the distance. The soldier's bullets seemed to pass through the woman's form without effect. She touched two of them before the others retreated to their vehicles. "They're real," I said grimly. "At least they were." "We need another way around," Ellie said, unfolding the map she'd pulled from the glove compartment. She'd always preferred paper maps to GPS, claiming digital could let you down when you needed it most. Right now, I was grateful for her old-school ways. "There's a fire road that cuts through the state forest," she said, tracing a route with her finger. "It connects to the mountain highway about 10 miles north. It'll be rough, but your monster truck should handle it." I ignored the jab at my vehicle. Ellie had never approved of my wasteful modifications to the truck, but I'd bet she was appreciating them now. "Fire road it is," I agreed, putting the truck in gear and backing away from the intersection before any of the entities noticed us. The entrance to the fire road was hidden behind an old lumber mill at the edge of town, marked only by a faded sign and a gate that was supposed to be locked, but had been broken open recently. The rutted dirt path beyond didn't look particularly inviting, but it was our best option. The truck handled the rough terrain easily, its reinforced suspension absorbing the worst of the jolts. I'd installed larger tires last winter, along with a custom lift kit that gave us the clearance we needed over rocks and fallen branches. All those weekends spent tinkering finally paying off. "How far to your brother-in-law's cabin?" I asked Ellie as we bounced along the fire road. "About 30 miles once we hit the mountain highway," she replied, eyes fixed on the map. "It's remote off-grid. David's brother is one of those doomsday prepper types. Always thought he was paranoid. But," she trailed off, looking out the window at the thick pine forest passing by. "Guess he wasn't so crazy after all," Marco finished from the backseat. The fire road wound through dense forest for several miles, climbing steadily into the foothills. The vibrations we'd felt in town had faded, but occasionally we'd see flashes of light through the trees, suggesting the alien craft were still active in the area. About halfway through the forest, we came upon an overturned Forest Service truck. I slowed, approaching cautiously. "Should we stop?" Marco asked. "There might be someone hurt." I studied the scene. The truck was empty, its windows shattered. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just an abandoned vehicle. "I don't like it," Ellie said, echoing my thoughts. "If someone crashed, where are they? Why didn't they stay with the vehicle?" As if in answer, a figure emerged from the trees about 50 yards ahead. A forest ranger, judging by the uniform, waving his arms for us to stop. "Don't," Ellie said sharply as I instinctively began to slow down. "Look at how he's moving." She was right. The ranger's movements were too smooth, too precise. Just like the woman at the checkpoint. "Hold on," I warned, pressing the accelerator to the floor. The truck surged forward, engine roaring. The entity in ranger form seemed to realize we weren't stopping. It rushed toward us with that unnatural speed, far faster than any human could move. At the last second, I swerved, but not enough. The truck clipped the figure, sending it spinning. In the rearview mirror, I saw it collapse into a writhing mass of metallic liquid before quickly reforming into the ranger shape and starting after us. "It's following," Marco shouted, looking back through the rear window. "It won't catch us," I assured him, though I wasn't entirely convinced. The thing moved unnaturally fast. But the fire road was getting steeper and rougher, territory where the truck's capabilities would outshine anything on foot, even alien foot. Sure enough, after about a mile of aggressive driving that tested even my custom suspension, the entity fell out of sight behind us. I didn't slow down until we reached the junction with the mountain highway, a smooth ribbon of asphalt that felt like luxury after the rutted fire road. By now, it was approaching 3:30 p.m., just over 2 hours since the ships had appeared. The mountain highway was surprisingly empty, with only the occasional vehicle passing in the opposite direction, headed toward town. I wondered if the occupants knew what awaited them there. "Try the radio," I suggested to Ellie. "See if there's any news." She switched on the truck's radio, cycling through static until she found a signal, the emergency broadcast system. "Remain in your homes. Military and emergency response personnel are coordinating efforts to address the situation. Unidentified aircraft have been reported over multiple major cities nationwide. Citizens are advised to avoid contact with unknown individuals and report any unusual activity to local authorities via emergency channels only. Repeat, remain in your homes." "Fat lot of good that does," Ellie muttered, switching to another frequency. This one carried a local station, where a clearly frightened DJ was abandoning the official script. Reports coming in from Boulder and Denver of people being, I don't know how to describe it, absorbed? Replaced? The military has set up blockades on all major highways, but communication is spotty. If you're hearing this, stay away from population centers. These things are taking human form and infiltrating. They look human but move strangely. Trust no one. I repeat, trust. The broadcast cut out, replaced by static. Marco leaned forward from the back seat. "Do you think it's just Colorado? Or is it everywhere?" "The emergency broadcast mentioned major cities nationwide," I said. "This isn't isolated." We drove in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The highway wound higher into the mountains, offering glimpses of the valley below. From this elevation, Pine Ridge looked deceivingly normal, except for the massive shapes still hovering above it, their angular forms breaking up the perfect blue of the Colorado sky. Around 4:15 p.m., we encountered another roadblock, this one hastily erected with civilian vehicles and manned by what appeared to be local hunters and a couple of park rangers. Real ones, judging by their anxious, very human movements. I slowed to a stop as a bearded man in flannel approached, rifle held casually but ready. "Where you folks headed?" he asked, leaning down to peer into the truck. "Mountain cabin off Route 23, Ellie replied. "My brother-in-law's place. We're trying to meet my family there." The man studied us carefully. "You from Pine Ridge? We've been hearing all kinds of crazy stuff." "It's all true," I said grimly. "They're taking people, becoming them somehow. We saw it happen." The man exchanged glances with his companions. "Yeah, that matches what others have said. We've set up this checkpoint to make sure none of those things make it up into the mountains." He hesitated. "We've worked out a test. Would you mind?" "What kind of test?" Marco asked nervously. "Nothing invasive," the man assured us. "We've noticed these things don't have normal reactions. No flinching, no startle response." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small firecracker. "Mind if I light this?" I nodded my consent, understanding the logic. The man stepped back, lit the firecracker, and tossed it a few feet from the truck. When it popped, louder than I expected, all three of us instinctively jumped. The man seemed satisfied. "You're human all right. Sorry for the precaution, but we've had a couple of close calls already." He gestured for his companions to clear the road. "Route 23 is about 12 miles ahead. Be careful, though. We've had reports of aircraft similar to the ones over Pine Ridge moving through the mountains." "Thanks for the warning," I said. "You all staying here?" The man nodded. "Someone's got to keep watch. We've got a camp set up about a mile back with the families, taking shifts on the roadblock." As we pulled away, Ellie looked troubled. "If those things can perfectly replicate humans, a startle test isn't going to work for long. They'll adapt, learn to mimic our reactions." "Maybe," I conceded, "but it's a start. They've only been here a few hours. There's got to be some way to tell the difference between them and us." The mountain highway narrowed as it climbed higher, switchbacking up steep slopes. The truck's engine labored against the grade, but the work I'd put into tuning it paid off. While most vehicles would be overheating in these conditions, my modified cooling system kept the temperature gauge firmly in the safe zone. We passed the turnoff for Route 23 around 5 p.m. The narrow road was even less traveled than the highway, winding through dense pine forest with steep drops on one side. According to Ellie, the cabin was about 5 miles up this road, then another 2 miles on an unmarked private drive. "We should be there before dark," she said, checking her watch, "assuming nothing else goes wrong." I've been a mechanic long enough to know that saying things like that is basically inviting trouble. Sure enough, as we rounded the next bend, we found the road blocked by a massive fallen pine tree. I stopped the truck, studying the obstacle. The tree was at least 3 feet in diameter, stretching completely across the narrow road. One end was splintered, suggesting it had been deliberately felled rather than falling naturally. "This doesn't feel right," I said, turning off the engine but leaving the key in the ignition. "That tree didn't fall on its own." "Trap," Ellie whispered, suddenly alert. "Maybe. Could also be locals blocking the road to keep strangers out." "What do we do?" Marco asked, his earlier bravado fading. I considered our options. Going around isn't possible with the drop-off on that side. We could turn back, try to find another route, but I'm not sure there is one. Or, I patted the dashboard. We could move it. From under my seat, I pulled out a heavy-duty tow chain, standard equipment in my line of work. "Marco, you're with me. Ellie, take the wheel. Any sign of trouble, you don't wait for us, understand?" She nodded grimly, sliding into the driver's seat as Marco and I exited the truck. The fallen tree was even larger up close. Freshly cut, the pine scent still strong. The splintering at the base confirmed my suspicion that it had been deliberately felled. likely with explosives based on the pattern of the break. "Help me get this chain around the trunk," I instructed Marco. We worked quickly, securing the heavy links around the thickest part of the tree. The other end I attached to the truck's reinforced tow hitch. Just as we finished, a sound from the forest made us both freeze. A cracking branch, too heavy to be a squirrel or small animal. "Get in the truck," I said quietly, gathering up the slack in the chain. Now, Marco didn't need to be told twice. He was halfway to the passenger door when a figure stepped out of the trees, a hiker in outdoor gear, with a backpack and walking stick. Perfectly normal, except for the too smooth way he moved. "Afternoon, folks," the hiker called, his voice pleasant but oddly cadenced. "Having some trouble with the road?" I kept moving toward the truck, chain in hand. "Just a fallen tree. We've got it handled." The hiker tilted his head at an angle that made my skin crawl. "Where are you headed?" "Not many cabins up this way." "Meeting friends?" I replied vaguely, reaching the truck. Marco was already inside, eyes wide with fear. Ellie had the engine running. "I don't think there are any friends up there anymore," the hiker said, still pleasant, but with an undertone that chilled me. "Why don't you come with me instead? It's safer down in the valley." He started moving toward us with that unnatural grace. Not running, but covering ground too quickly to be normal walking. I jumped into the passenger seat, slamming the door. "Go," I shouted to Ellie. Full power, steady acceleration. She didn't hesitate, pressing the accelerator gradually but firmly. The truck's engine strained against the massive weight of the tree. The chain went taut, creaking under the tension. The hiker had reached the rear of the truck now, one hand stretching toward us, elongating in a way no human arm should. "More power," I urged. Ellie floored it. The truck's tires spun, found purchase, and suddenly we were moving, dragging the massive tree with us. It pivoted on the narrow road, scraping against the rocky cliff face on one side. In the side mirror, I watched as the hiker's form seemed to ripple and distort, abandoning its human disguise. The metallic entity flowed after us, but couldn't match the truck's speed now that we were moving. We dragged the tree about 50 yards before Ellie was able to maneuver the truck around it, leaving it partially blocking the road behind us. The entity was still following, but falling behind. "That was too close," Marco gasped from the back seat. "They're hunting," Ellie said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Setting traps." I nodded, looking back at the receding figure. "They're learning fast. Too fast." The rest of the journey to the turnoff for the cabin was tense but uneventful. The unmarked private drive was little more than a dirt track, barely visible among the trees. If Ellie hadn't known exactly what to look for, we would have missed it entirely. The track wound through dense forest for about 2 miles before opening into a small clearing. In the center stood a sturdy log cabin, smoke curling from the chimney. A few vehicles were parked nearby, including Ellie's husband's distinctive red Jeep. Ellie let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh when she saw it. "They made it," she whispered. "They're here." As we pulled into the clearing, the cabin door opened and a man stepped out, rifle ready. David Chun, Ellie's husband, looking haggard but very much alive. Behind him came an older, bearded man who could only be his brother, similar features but harder, more weathered. Ellie was out of the truck before we'd fully stopped, running toward her husband. I watched closely, still wary after our encounter on the road, but David's reaction was pure human emotion. He caught Ellie in a fierce embrace that dispelled any doubts. Marco and I followed more slowly. By the time we reached the cabin, a tearful reunion was in progress between Ellie and her 2 children, a boy and girl who looked to be around 10 and 8. David's brother approached us, rifle still in hand, but pointed safely downward. "Name's Ray," he said gruffly. "You folks see any of them on the way up?" "One," I confirmed. It had set a trap on the road, felled tree to stop vehicles. Ray nodded as if this confirmed something. "Clever bastards. Been watching them all afternoon through the scope. They look human but move all wrong. And they can't seem to handle the higher elevations as well, move slower the higher they go." He gestured toward the cabin. "Come on in. We've got food and a radio that's picking up some military channels." The interior of the cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, with a main room dominated by a stone fireplace and smaller bedrooms off to the sides. 6 other people were inside, another family that had escaped from a neighboring town, according to Ray. The adults looked shell-shocked, the children confused and frightened. Ray had set up an impressive communication center on a table by the window, ham radio, police scanner, even a satellite phone. Powers from solar panels and a backup generator, he explained. Got enough fuel to last a month if we're careful. Food for longer. Any news? I asked, nodding toward the radio equipment. Ray's expression darkened. It's bad. These things have hit every major city globally, as far as I can tell. Military's trying to fight back, but conventional weapons don't do much. They're warning about infiltration at all levels. Trust no one, that kind of thing. We saw them take people, Marco said quietly. Absorb them somehow, and then become them. Ray nodded grimly. Seems to be their primary tactic. They don't just want to destroy, they want to replace. The broadcasts are calling it an assimilation invasion. As night fell, we gathered around the fireplace, sharing what information each of us had. The other family had seen the crafts appear over their town, followed by what they described as metal people going door to door. They'd fled immediately, taking back roads into the mountains. David had been at work when it started, but had managed to get to the children's school before the aliens reached it. The principal, already replaced, had tried to prevent parents from taking their children, but panic and chaos had worked in David's favor. Ray, for his part, had been preparing for something like this for years, though admittedly he'd been expecting nuclear war or economic collapse rather than alien invasion. Still, his preparations had created this haven, this small pocket of safety in a world rapidly falling apart. Around 10 p.m., I stepped outside for some air, needing a moment alone to process everything that had happened. The night was clear, stars brilliantly visible against the black sky. In the distance, strange lights pulsed on the horizon, presumably the alien craft continuing their work. The door opened behind me and Ray stepped out, offering a mug of coffee. Thought you could use this, he said. It's going to be a long night. I accepted gratefully, the warmth of the mug comforting against the mountain chill. Thanks. For all of this, really. If you hadn't prepared this place. He shrugged. Always knew something was coming. Just didn't know what. He took a sip from his own mug. Heard you're a mechanic. Yeah. Own a garage in Pine Ridge. Or did anyway. Good. We could use someone with mechanical know-how. Got vehicles that need maintaining, the generator, solar system. In this new world, practical skills are going to matter more than ever. I nodded, understanding what he was offering. Not just shelter for tonight, but a place, a purpose in whatever came next. I've been thinking about those things, I said after a moment. The way they move, how they function. Everything mechanical has limitations, weaknesses. Even them. Been thinking the same, Ray agreed. They don't like the altitude, for one. Seem to struggle above 8,000 feet. This cabin's at 9,200. And they're vulnerable while transforming, I added. We saw one get hit by a car. It collapsed back into that liquid metal state before reforming. Now we're talking, Ray said, a glint of approval in his eyes. Identify the weaknesses, exploit them. That's how we survive. The radio inside squawked suddenly with an urgent transmission. We hurried back in to hear a military broadcast cutting through static. Confirmed vulnerability to sustained high-voltage electrical current. Repeat, entities have confirmed vulnerability to electrical current. Civilian populations advised to utilize available electrical sources as defensive measures. Military distribution of specialized electrical weapons is underway at designated safe zones. I exchanged glances with Ray. Electricity, I murmured. Makes sense. If there's some kind of metallic or conductive life form. I've got equipment, Ray said, mind already racing ahead. Solar batteries, power inverters. We could rig up some kind of defensive perimeter. For the first time since those ships appeared in the sky, I felt a flicker of hope. Not just for survival, but for resistance. Inside, the others had heard the broadcast too. Faces that had been drawn with fear now showed the first hints of determination. We weren't helpless. We could fight back. As midnight approached, marking the end of the first day of invasion, we gathered around Ray's table, sketching plans for electrified barriers and improvised weapons. My mechanical knowledge proving useful in ways I'd never imagined. The world had changed irrevocably in less than 12 hours. Towns had fallen, people had been taken, governments were in chaos. But here, in this remote cabin, a small group of survivors was already planning for tomorrow. I looked around at these people, strangers this morning, now comrades in a struggle none of us had asked for, but all of us were committed to facing together. Ellie with her practical resourcefulness, Marco with his quick learning and adaptability, Ray with his foresight and determination, and all the others, each bringing different skills and perspectives. Maybe that was humanity's greatest strength, I reflected. Not our technology or weapons, but our ability to adapt, to work together, to find solutions to problems we'd never imagined facing. Outside, the alien craft continued their ominous patrol of the night sky. But they hadn't found us yet. And when they did, they discovered that humans weren't as easy to replace as they might have thought. I am Hector Alvarez, a mechanic from Pine Ridge, Colorado, and I survived the first 12 hours of the alien invasion. The battle for our world has just begun, but for the first time since those ships appeared, I believe we have a fighting chance.